Welcome to Autocar, and you join me on the beautiful California coastline, and we're going to give you a first look today at one of the most anticipated motorcycles of 2018, the brand new Royal Enfield Interceptor 650.
The Interceptor is not a new name for Royal Enfield, and the original Interceptor was sold in America in the 1960s, and it gained quite a following back in its day. So it's quite fitting that over half a century later, we get to ride the modern Interceptor 650 and its twin, the Continental GT 650 here as well. Both these bikes are identical under the skin, and the only differences come in the design and the riding position. So we're going to focus this review largely on the Interceptor, which is sure to be the much bigger seller in our market. Now, let's begin with the one thing we've known quite well for a while, the design.
Now, it's nearly been a full year since we first saw the Interceptor 650 at EICMA 2017, and visually, not a lot has changed since. This is still an old school and very handsome looking motorcycle.
The Interceptor makes a great first impression with a clean and classic design that comprises an old school round headlamp, a well-shaped fuel tank, a long and flat seat, and a smart-looking set of 18-inch spoke trims. As a result of this utter straightforwardness, the big parallel twin engine lurking within the chassis plays a large role in the design. Royal Enfield knows this well, which is why attention has been paid towards ensuring an organic and retro-inspired round theme for the shape of the engine fins, the cam covers, and of course the large cases that reside underneath. All of this is finished well, as are the large chromed exhausts. Now the engine is quite wide, which is why Royal Enfield has installed small metal protectors on either side to prevent the knees from accidentally coming in contact with hot metal. Build quality and finish all round are at very acceptable levels, but there are a few reminders that this bike is meant to be accessible to a large audience. You'll notice that in the simple switchgear and the lack of features like adjustable levers, LED lighting, and in the simple twin pod dials that give you a fuel gauge and 2 trip meters, but miss out on a clock and a gear position indicator. But all of this will make good sense to you when we get to the expected price at the end of this review. Over at the rear of the motorcycle, some may not like the relatively narrow tyre, but the dual exhausts give the Royal Enfield twins solid presence, and you'll want to keep that in mind while filtering through typically close-packed traffic in India. Now with that out of the way, let's get to the bit that you've really been waiting to hear about.
Now, Royal Enfield's already shown us in the past that they can build a good chassis, and bikes like the old Continental GT and the Himalayan have been proof of that. But as far as engines, that's not always been the case, and this time, the big test lies in this area.
With the brand new 648cc parallel twin engine, Royal Enfield has taken a deep dive into the modern era. Gone are the old pushrod actuated 2-valve setups, and the bike now gets a 4-valve head with a single overhead camshaft. A balancer shaft promises to take care of any refinement issues, and a 6-speed gearbox with a slip assist clutch is another first for the company. But there is a nod to tradition in that this is still an air-cooled engine, although it is aided by an oil cooler that resides neatly between the frame down tubes.
And the result of all that work is really impressive. This is an engine that doesn't sound or feel like any Royal Enfield engine you've ever experienced in the past.
You won't find a Kickstarter here, but a brief press of the starter button quickly fires up the motor, and it erupts into a smooth but deep and offbeat pulse. This is a sound that actually reminds of the latest modern classic Triumphs, and that's because this engine shares a similar 270-degree firing order. Low-speed manners are impeccable thanks to very well-judged fueling that ensures opening the throttle never feels abrupt or jerky. The slip assist clutch results in smoother downshifts, and the clutch lever weight is reasonable too. What you'll notice almost immediately is that this engine is really smooth. There's a small amount of feeling in the handlebar and pegs, but this is consistent across all speeds, be it 20 km per hour in town or 120 km per hour on the highway. You can't really call them vibrations, but they just serve to remind you that there's a big engine alive between your legs. Once at highway speeds, the all-important 100 kph cruise arrives at just above 4000 rpm, at which point the bike is absolutely relaxed. 120 kph is at an almost equally stress-free 5000 rpm. If you find the space, the Interceptor will show you above 180 km per hour on the clocks. And for those of you interested, Royal Enfield claims a fuel efficiency of 25.5 kpl in the World Motorcycle Test Cycle. No matter your riding style, the 6-speed gearbox remains superbly precise and I never had any misshifts even when shifting without the clutch.
Now, while the new engine proves to be surprisingly enjoyable, Royal Enfield has also given this bike a new chassis that complements that performance really well.
Both the Interceptor 650 and the Continental GT 650 share a new double cradle chassis as well as the same suspension and brake setup. The 41mm fork and dual charge gas shock absorbers are made by Gabriel, while the braking system is by Bybre. Dual channel ABS is standard, but there's no electronic wizardry in the form of traction control or riding modes. On the road, ride quality is compliant but a little on the firm side, and I'm keen to see how this pans out on Indian roads. But out in California, we were treated to some superb winding roads, both tight and flowing, and the Interceptor proved to be more eager here than I was expecting. But we did get a hint of this character when we first sat on the motorcycle.
Now, I have to admit, I'm a little surprised and pleasantly so with the riding position. The handlebar is nice and wide, quite upright, but the foot pegs are a little higher up than I was expecting. Now, this doesn't put you in any form of discomfort and you can sit like this all day long, but what it does is it injects a small amount of involvement and sportiness into the package, and I really like that.
Even though the pace on our ride wasn't flat out, it was quite brisk in some sections, and that revealed that the Interceptor 650 is not a sport bike, but it's no slouch either.
The best way to describe how this bike handles is neutral. It does whatever you ask of it, it never pulls any surprises, and you can actually carry some serious speeds through the corners. Everything works perfectly well, the suspension is compliant, the brakes are up to the mark, and I never even had any issues with the cornering clearance. Now, this is a very straightforward motorcycle, but it's also one you can have a lot of fun on.
Everything about the Interceptor's chassis setup encourages you, and the bike's dynamic limits are quite high. Eventually though, you push so much that you get to the point where you start to want more suspension control and braking performance, as well as grip from the Pirelli Phantom Sports Comp tires. But this arrives when the speeds are at a level that is seriously impressive for a motorcycle like this. A couple of hours into the ride, I started to struggle with the quest to find negatives with this motorcycle. Aside from a seat that starts to feel firm after a while, the one issue I found was that the front end starts to get a little light upwards of 120 km/h. It's not scary or intimidating, and the steering never threatens to go into a tank slapper, but you do feel it happening. How that tendency will pan out on our imperfect roads is something to be seen. At this point, we get to the right time to discuss the Continental GT, because the difference between these two bikes largely lies in how they feel to ride. The Conti's pretty cafe racer lines will be really appealing to some, but you could essentially swap the fuel tank, seat, slightly higher set foot pegs, and the clip-on bars to go from the cafe racer back to the Interceptor and vice versa. Aside from those four factors, the only other mechanical differentiator is that the Conti GT runs slightly higher preload settings in the rear suspension, which you can adjust this according to your liking. On the go, the GT puts you in a much more sporty riding position that makes the bike feel more involving on the right kind of roads, but it is more taxing on the back and wrists. What this also does is that it encourages you to ride harder and harder and pushes the chassis into a zone of discomfort faster than you would tend to do with the Interceptor. On the other hand, the Conti's front end feels a little more stable than the Interceptor's at high straight line speeds, probably because of the low leverage generated by its clip-on bars. As you'd expect then, the Conti is the one to have for quick and exciting rides, but the Interceptor can be just as fast when you want it, and it is more of a pleasure to ride at slow speeds and over longer distances. The new Royal Enfield Twins are remarkably enjoyable motorcycles to ride, and they represent a quantum leap forward for the company. But the really exciting news is that both these bikes are expected to go on sale in India soon, and the price is rumored to be below the Rs 3 lakh mark, which is simply sensational. Royal Enfield is about to unleash its twins among the pigeons, and that's going to give a lot of manufacturers, both domestic and international, a lot to think about.
Based on our initial experiences here in California, it's clear that Royal Enfield just hasn't made two new motorcycles, they've entered a whole new era. Now, this is without any form of exaggeration, a world-class product, and I'm really excited to see what it's like to ride back home. For now, I think the only questions that remain to be answered are how it will fare in the long run and just how competitive the price is going to be. Well done, Royal Enfield. Well done.